Hi, we're here today to talk about Teen Titans Go. And believe it or not, there's an amazing episode of Teen Titans Go that was all about typography, which blew me away. A friend of mine told me about this, and I was expecting that, oh, there was an episode of the show, and maybe there was a font joke in there about Comic Sans or something, which is usually the level of what you see in stuff like this. And when I watched the episode, I was blown away that it turned out to be an amazing discussion of typography and the importance of fonts and what they do in the world and what they mean in like the most inviting way. So I had to roll back and check and see who wrote such a thing. And I tracked down via Twitter and my going nuts about how excited I was on this, the incredible Talya Perper, who wrote this episode. And Talya is with us today to talk more about what she does at the show, and how this came together and how exactly she made this amazing thing about fonts in this really inviting way that all people can enjoy. Welcome, Talya.
I'm so happy to be here. I know we've already had this conversation before at previous events, but I love being able to talk about it with new people, and thank you so much for having me.
I think anything that helps more people see this particular episode of Teen Titans Go can only be for the good, because it really is an incredible introduction to typography for people who don't think about it. And for people who know a lot about typography, what really impressed me about it is that it's actually very respectful of like what we care so much about, choosing fonts and using fonts. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do
Oh,
on
yeah.
Teen Titans Go?
Sure. So my official job is storyboard artist. So that's what I do full time for the show. But I also had an opportunity to pitch some episodes that I wrote the script for. Because usually when we're boarding, we get the script, it's already taken care of. But I was like, I want to write a script. And this was one of the first ideas that I pitched that was miraculously went through all the way with like very few issues. And it's inspired mostly by my first job when I moved out to LA, when I was still taking art classes, but like paying the bills with I worked at this graphic design studio that focused on movie posters, and I was using my film degree to like watch the movie, synopsize the movie. The designers don't have to watch the movie now.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot about design while I was there, and that was something that really had a big impact on me. This whole idea of like the form must meet the function, which I'm sure is applicable to a lot of different careers that involve art. So I used what I learned about like the culture of font snobbery and applied it to an episode, because I figured, I don't think they've done anything like this before on Titans. So let's see how it goes.
That's awesome. And the can you say a little bit about what specifically the role of being doing storyboarding is
Oh,
on?
right. So a storyboarder gets the script, and then they visualize what the script has written in a way that is now feasible for animators and designers to actually make into a fully realized episode. So everything that you see on the screen in terms of composition, in terms of character acting, like rough designs that the designers later like zhuzh with their magic touch, like this is all the blueprint for what ends up being a fully animated episode.
All right, that's cool. Now I know that there were some questions about whether or not you'd be able to show actual clips of the real episode. So what we have for everyone to see to get an idea of what you do as a storyboard artist is we have this clip of sort of a storyboard visualization of a part of the episode with sound. But I love this because it is a segment from the show, which is a quick introduction that Cyborg gives about why fonts are important. But let's show that clip so people can get a sense of the tone of how you brought fonts to the world in this episode of Zimdings.
Yeah.
Typography is an art, beastie. Allow me to illustrate. For Exhibit A, we have an announcement for a serious business meeting at 3:30 in the conference room.
That does look like serious business.
And for Exhibit B, you can see there's a Pretty Kitty Jamboree at 5:30 in the rec center.
Ooh, I would love to go to the Pretty Kitty Jamboree.
But would you be interested in some serious business?
Oh no, now that business ain't got no seriousness at all.
And what about a Pretty Kitty Jamboree?
What evil magic is this?
That was super fun. I hope you all loved it as much as I did. I loved this idea that the font snobbery creeps into this story where Cyborg is freaking out because there are fonts that people are supposed to use to do certain things. And really the episode doesn't even just let that go without being examined. What's really, really fun as the story goes by is that actually, as the Teen Titans go through and they have these adventures, it's set up where the supervillain is someone who actually talks about a lot of fonts and who is a much maligned inventor of a Dingbats font called Dingdings in Universe, and he wished that it got the same kind of respect as the creator of all these other fonts have done. But was also fascinating to me, again, as I was sort of expecting this to be like a very like most common denominator bit of font jokes, was that you actually did seem to like draw from a lot of different type styles and talking and thinking about it. But what kind of fonts were available to you? Why did you choose some of the ones that you did in that example that I was just showing?
Oh yeah, that's right. So the reason I chose some of these fonts was just because we work in Adobe Flash or Adobe Animate now. And these were all the ones that were preloaded in Flash. I was trying to get some good variety in there, but I was also at the same time trying to make it accessible to children. And these are the types of fonts that would, I assume, be common on most school computers. So like a child could reasonably have come across these and been like, oh yeah, I remember Bauhaus. I remember Trajan Pro. Like some of these are pretty iconic fonts. So like it's nothing that like a kid could see and it would go over their head necessarily.
I think that's what's great about it, is because if you'd gone down the route of like picking very esoteric things that maybe were like in jokes for designers, what would be the point if most people couldn't track those down right away and sort of like have this moment of being like, hey, this is something that I can pick and I can have some control over it. And there's this other interesting aspect of the story of Zimdings where he is taken over. He's exiled to an island, and where he encounters a native population and then forces them to speak in this language based on his dingbats that he put up. And there was this surprising aspect in the story about the nature of colonialism, that he like encountered this culture and assumed they had no language or culture of their own, and he imposed one based on his own typography. And when you and I first talked about this, you were surprised when I said that this is actually a big point of discussion in the world of typography these days. But how did you come about this colonialism aspect?
Well, it's interesting because I'm trying to create this new character, right? That's just for this one episode. So I have to like make it clear that he's a villain, but also motivated in a meaningful way, that he doesn't think of himself as a villain. And I thought it would be funny to have some sort of origin story for Wingdings, or that kids would find entertaining, like, oh, it's actually the secret code, or like this guy who came up with it was like maligned by the community. I mean, I know that's not the real story, but like I thought it would be funny if he got like exiled to this special place that they now have to explore. And I kind of based it a little bit off of Heart of Darkness, the book that Apocalypse Now is based off of.
Sure.
Because then it lends itself to a very clear structure of like, okay, they enter the new world, they go into the village. Inside the village is like a secret lab, and like it just progresses in a very straightforward way. And I added this extra colonialism aspect to it because that was a big theme in the book, which I read in high school. So I was just sort of blending things from my life and film analysis, like film school stuff. But I was, that's why I was surprised and happily surprised that it ended up being a big theme in typography as a concept period. So that was kind of a happy accident.
It was great the way it came together. Now, you mentioned that another big influence on sort of some of your approach to the visual gags in this was the Phantom Toll Booth.
Oh, yes.
Which led to these amazing lettering typographic gags that were scattered throughout the episode.
Yes, that
like
was a huge influence
for instance,
on me.
the Comic Sans crabs that they encounter once they arrive on the island, as well as some of these other guys. When you see really when you get to the island in the episode that every detail is actually a sort of great lettering gag, and it just never stops, and it's so much fun. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you went down that path?
Well, I love the Phantom Toll Booth, even though, I mean, it came out before my time, but that used to air on Cartoon Network fairly regularly. And I always loved those kind of meta jokes, and Teen Titans Go is also very into that sort of sense of humor. So I thought it would be a good blend. I also have been posting clips to TikTok now, and people are like, is this a Word World reference? And it's like, not really, but I mean, I guess it is like, it's not a far cry to be like, okay, yeah, like make the words what they are. It's, I don't know. It's just I thought it was a charming concept, and I also storyboarded on this episode. So I wrote it thinking like, oh, this is gonna be so cool. And then I started boarding it and was like, uh-oh, like, no, I have to draw it all.
What I think is great about it though is that it's part of how there winds up with there being so many layers of typographic visual jokes. You know, there is a sort of a certain kind of style of like lettering or display font that you know, you see pop up around like holidays. You have a lot of like spooky Halloweeny fonts and things where things look like things, or you know, like the classic you know, the way the word ice gets spelled out on refrigerators for ice creams and things. And I just kind of loved that there's this spirit of the letters are spelling out what things are, but they're also taking on these visual characteristics to be illustrative as well. And it was cool that the gags keep like hitting on so many layers like that all through this, which I think are a nice way that sort of shows how typography is often used by designers to sort of like slip in things about the personality of things without having to necessarily screen it. It just helps you get the vibe.
Yeah, I've always been of the mind that like the form must meet the function. It like if it's going to work, I mean, like you get that same motif in like character design and writing too, where like bad design is like, oh, this looks really cool, but it has nothing to do with the story or like serving it in any way. So I'm always trying to be aware of that.
Sure. How have people reacted to this episode now that it's been out for a while? I mean, I know that I was ranting about it on Twitter and people who followed me seem to get it, but have more people contacted you about this?
I think it's hit the hardest for sure in the type community because a few months after it came out, that's when you retweeted it, because I post my clips on Twitter regularly, and that I got a lot of really sweet comments from families, especially saying like, I was able to talk to my kid about my job as a result of this episode, and like that just really warms my heart because that's like a huge W for me as a writer for kids stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, like I've been posting stuff to TikTok too, but like it doesn't hit the same way I think for older kids because they're kind of maybe like beyond that. I don't know. Like I think the the biggest draw of Teen Titans Go is that it's a co-viewing show, like parents watch with their kids. So making that a positive experience for people so that like parents can watch and not feel like, ugh, you know, when they're watching their kids' shows. That's extremely fulfilling for me.
I love the idea that this is really successful as a way to like, you know, that an adult who cares about typography can like, you know, help some like a kid make sense of it, because they're of course gonna encounter fonts like all throughout their lives. And that's why I was so impressed that actually it was like filled with so much like really good information about like why you shouldn't be a snob about fonts, and like choosing the right thing doesn't mean that like it shouldn't be accessible to everyone.
Right, exactly. At the end, Cyborg has to overcome his font snobbery to be able to join the others in battle, because they all fuse with different fonts, and with their powers combined, they defeat the villain.
They have to become the League of Garbage Fonts.
Yeah, and
where they actually embrace what the fonts are and what they can do, which honestly was like a very like super idea, and I loved it.
Yeah, because people shit on fonts like Comic Sans or whatever, or Papyrus, as like, because they are abused in a lot of ways, but it's because they're used outside of the intention of you know, their personalities and stuff like that. So I think it really just depends on how you use these fonts to great effect.
Yeah, I've always had this maxim that like just about any font that I've ever encountered has a place where it can be used well with some care and some thought about what the personality is. You can make anything work at some point for something. And I think that's a spirit that comes across really well in this, where that, you know, even some, you know, again, the much maligned Comic Sans was the joke that I was expecting this to all be about. And I loved that it was so respectful about the ideas, like, it's not bad just because people like it. It's not bad because, you know, you've seen it used in ways you don't really like. And you just have to sort of embrace that these things have individual personalities, and people do like them just because they've seen them a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, I was also influenced by this other video game that I'm sure many type people are aware of called Undertale, where two of the characters are named Sans and Papyrus, and their dialogue pops up as Sans and Papyrus as opposed to everyone else's dialogue, which is just the default. And it really tells you a lot about their personalities. Obviously, I couldn't really like directly reference it in the show because we would need to like get the rights, and that's expensive. But like, in terms of just the vibe that I was trying to give off, it's like, oh yeah, like all these fonts have personalities. They're like characters, and that's really fun to think about, like to let your imagination go wild.
That's totally awesome. Thank you so much for having this chat about with me again, and for writing this episode and sharing it with people.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Where do you suggest that people go to find out more about what you do and see some more of the fun things that you do?
Oh, sure. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at TARETARI, Tare. And yeah, and I'm also on YouTube as Talya Perper. You can watch all my storyboard clips, etc. on the web. Thank you so much.
Great. Keep at it. It's great stuff. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.